1 second. So we're talking about The Road Not Taken. It's a Robert Frost poem, a lot of people's favorite. And we're talking about its literal meaning. That's the meaning that the words say very literally. Very literally speaking, what is this poem about?
It's about two different roads.
In the woods. Right. So someone has taken a walk in the woods, and they see a path going this way and a path going this way, and they stand there and they think, I can't do both on the same day. Which one am I going to take? So that's literally what this poem is about, correct? Okay. Are the paths equal? Or is one better than the other?
One,
better than the other.
Oh, they were equal.
They are equal. How do you know that? Can you use a line from the poem to prove that they are equal?
And both that morning equally late.
There it is. Okay, so it's really important to connect to that literal meaning right away, right? It says, one of them is then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. But then it says, but as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same, right? So he's looking there going, well, I guess I'll take this one because it's a little grassier than this one, but really they're about the same, and both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. So they're both good paths, okay? I kept the first for another day. Now, this is where we start to get a hint of some larger meaning. Can somebody read the second part of that stanza for us?
Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back.
Okay, now, how many of y'all go for hikes in the woods? Anybody? Just me and Alan, Courtney? All right, so a few of us go. I don't know about y'all, but when I go, I have the trails that I can walk, right? I've got about 5 trails that are close to the house that I can go to and take a good hike in the woods. So I go back to those trails all the time, right? And let's say I'm going to Moss Rock for a hike. There's about 4 different trails there, and I can totally go back another day and take the other trail. Am I right, guys? Okay, so what's with the melodrama here? This is where we start to get the sense that there's a bigger meaning. Am I right? Because usually there's not that much melodrama about a hike in the woods. Yes? Okay, so what does this mean, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back? What does that mean?
But to me, it sounds like this is kind of like a road he ain't never been on before.
Okay. And so what's the big deal? Why is he worrying about this so much?
Because he doesn't really know, like, the outcome. Like, he doesn't know how it's going to go.
Okay, so he doesn't know the outcome. And let's get to the literal meaning of knowing how way leads on to way. I doubted if I should ever come back. Does anybody know what that means? What does way leads on to way mean? Are we stuck on that? Okay, we're a little stuck on that. All right, so it means that once you're on a path, it's hard to back up and take a different path. It's a little bit like in Risk, where to make a change required some discomfort, right? So once let's say you're at Moss Rock and you're following the white trail, and you're following those white blazes, and you decide, oh, I'd actually rather go on the blue trail. But you're going to have to back up a half a mile in the woods to where it connects to the blue trail. And that's a pain in the butt. That's just literally, right? So way is, now the white trail connects to the yellow trail at one point, and they hook up together for a little while, and then the yellow trail can connect you back to the white trail, but to get back all the way to the blue trail, now you're on the yellow trail, and that doesn't connect to the blue trail at all. So you'd have to go back to the white trail, then back to the blue trail. Because the way has led on to way, right? Let's put it in terms of roads. You are driving up 65 and you decide to go 459 around the city, right? How long is it going to be before you can get back to 65? Sometimes all the way around, but sometimes you can take another way that leads you back, but it's once you're on a road, it's hard to get back. Has anybody ever missed an exit and gotten on the wrong highway and had to drive a couple of exits before they could turn around? Right. Turning around is harder than just following the path you're on sometimes, right? So that's literally what it means. Way leads on to way. One road leads to another road, and then it's harder to backtrack. And he says, I doubted if I should ever come back. Now, again, traveling on literal roads, all you need to do is turn around. And it might be a couple of exits before you can turn around, or it might be 10 miles before the next exit, but you can just turn around. You can go back, right? So now we have to think about that higher meaning. And it's in this stanza. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Ages and ages hence. Literally, what does that mean?
Long, long time in the future.
Years and years and years from now, I'm going to look back at this walk in the woods and sigh. How do we feel when we sigh, folks? How do we feel when we sigh?
Well, you can feel many ways, but it's mostly associated with disappointment.
Okay, so there's disappointment, which is why it always cracks me up when people read this at graduations, because it's like, I took the unusual road, and that's going to make all the difference in my life, and it's so not what he's doing here. What is it to look back at a choice you made in the past and sigh? That's what he's talking about here, y'all. And I don't think it's necessarily regret. Let's think about some of the life choices that we make, all right? For example, at some point in my life, I decided to have one kid. I think it was a good choice. I don't really have the choice at this point to change my decision, right? And every once in a while, I see a family with 3 kids or, and I go, that would have been nice. Or I see one of my friends having a new little baby and I go, Now, do I regret that? No. Every time I see 3 kids acting out and their mother trying to deal with them, I'm like, whew, dodged a bullet. I feel good about the decision most of the time, but sometimes there's a little sigh. Has anybody ever had that? You look at your life and you look back. You might not be old enough yet to look back at your life and sigh. Ages and ages hence you might. Right? Do you have a bead on anything in there where you might look back and have a little sigh? The roads are both good. Several children, 1 child, both good roads. But you can look back and have a sigh either way. What if I'd had 3 kids and they were exhausting me? You don't think I'm going to look back at the choice and go, I could have stayed with 1. you know you might, right? So the choices don't have to have been bad choices to look back and sigh. What choices are you making right now where they're equal, but you might sigh about them later? Portia? I can.
Okay, so are the roads talking about 2 different decisions that we make in life? I'm just trying to understand.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep. Does anybody know has anybody ever, it's Talking about being at a crossroads. We've all heard that phrase before. I'm at a crossroads. That means you've got two roads to choose and you're picking. How many of you chose between more than one community college to come to school at? Yeah, and you picked this one. And here we are. It doesn't... And here's the thing with college choices, and especially for those of you who are thinking about going to a four-year college, you're going to pick one and it's going to be fine. Right? And you could look back and say, oh, I could have picked this other one, but you didn't. You picked the one you picked and it was good. And you made the best of it. Right? What other choices do we make where we might look back and sigh? Choices. Crossroads we've been at.
Having kids.
Having kids. You don't regret your kids, and yet every once in a while there's a little sigh. I could be out.
Yes.
I could be.
It's a big sigh.
I could not be paying for a babysitter right now. Yeah, yeah, it is, and yet both that morning equally lay. You're on a fine path.
Yeah, I don't regret her, but it's
No.
some days when she just losing her little mind screaming. I just be like, where's your grandma? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and again, you it's never a regret exactly, but there are times when you sigh and say, I could be traveling right now. But I'm not. Here I am. Okay, changing a diaper instead, right? So yeah. Or dealing with a tantrum, or dealing with an attitude, or something. Yes, exactly. Other crossroads you've been at. It's Corian.
I don't know if this is good, but like rather do what you want to do, like choose the right path or go the wrong path, like do what your friends do or something like that. Because you want to, I mean, they your friends, so you want to do whatever they doing or choose the right thing to do.
I really like that idea that you can choose a path that's not the same as what everybody else is doing, but know that you're doing the right thing for you, right? And there's a lot of times where we decide to take that road less traveled, that road that looks like it's just for us, and that's what he's doing. He's choosing a road that's just for him. And there may
separation for elevation.
Yeah.
So I try to go back there.
Absolutely. And that's fantastic. Making that independent choice, not letting any expectations from anyone else guide which road you choose. And I think that's probably, I shouldn't be so sarcastic. That's why we choose it for graduations, right? Because people are at a crossroads at graduations. They're choosing what's next, and it's an important moment. And it's important to choose what you want to do, to choose the path that looks right for you, so that when you look back, it's just with a little sigh and not massive regret, and you don't have to come back and go, right? Now that's the thing though, and this is where I disagree with Frost. Frost is a little bit of a fatalist. I think you can go back and pick another path at a lot of different junctions, right? At a lot of different junctions you can. All right. We did not understand either the fish or the bean eaters. Which one do y'all want to discuss? Or a brown girl dead? There are three that we struggled with. Which one do you want to deal with first? Well, I come to the fish first. So let's talk about the fish. I don't know this one by heart. It's a strange poem. Let's start with the literal meaning. What is this literally about?
She's catching fish.
She has caught a large fish. That is correct. Is this a beautiful fish or a very ugly fish?
It's an ugly fish.
It is an ugly fish. Okay, so it's probably a North Atlantic fish, if I know anything about where Elizabeth Bishop was. It's a North Atlantic. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper. Ew! Gross, man. He's infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen. She's caught this fish. Is it a young fish or an old fish?
An old fish.
Yes, it is an old fish. The gills can cut you. Anybody who's fished knows that the gills can be quite sharp. You gotta have some gloves on or not deal with the gills. They're pretty sharp. But she thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones. So it's a white fish. That means it's something like a haddock, which are really ugly fish, y'all, but they taste delicious. Many of our delicious fish are disgusting looking, right? It's true, but they are beautiful when they're cooked up. So this, again, she's thinking about what it would be like to eat it. It would be a delightful fish to eat. But getting rid of the reds and blacks of his shiny entrails and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. So she's thinking about what it would be like to do what?
Fillet him.
Fillet the fish or clean the fish. Right, clean it. Right, get it ready to eat. Well, so that's gross, right? Has anybody here ever cleaned fish for eating?
All the time.
All the time, yes. I've done it too, more than I care to admit. It's not my favorite task. I find it kind of gross. But when my friends who are vegetarians say, oh, if you had to prepare your own meat, you'd be a vegetarian, I'm like, no, I wouldn't. I would take the head right off that chicken. And I would dunk it in the boiling water and pluck those feathers. Yes, I would. Because I've done it on a farm. And I've cleaned the fish, and I haven't dressed a deer, but that's because, I haven't gotten there yet. All right. But she doesn't clean the fish. What does she do with the fish?
She lets him go.
She lets the fish go. What does he have in his mouth? We're going to take a look at this. It says, and from that his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4, and a wire leader with a swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. How many times has this fish broken a fisherman's line? 5 broken lines. What is it? How strong does a fish have to be to break a line?
Pretty strong.
Pretty
Especially
strong.
a wire leader.
Especially a wire. This fish swam so hard it broke a wire, y'all. This is a very tough and resilient fish. And she is a little bit, a green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. She's talking about him with some respect. Why do you have some respect for a fish that's gotten away 5 times?
That's one tough sucker.
That's one tough sucker. Exactly. And she is feeling some victory. She said, I stared and victory filled up the little rented boat. Why does victory fill up the boat?
Because she's the first one to actually catch it.
Yes, Nikayla, exactly. She finally caught this uncatchable fish. Sometimes when you're fishing in a lake, there's a legend of a fish that nobody can catch, right? And you're after it, and if you catch it, man, that is the fish that got away. And she has caught it. Why let it go?
So other people can experience that?
Yeah. What's the rainbow? I know that was confusing. What's the rainbow? says from the pool of bilge. Do you know what bilge is? It's water that's gotten into the boat either by splashing in or coming in through a small leak, and it's pretty grubby water, and some oil had spread on it. What happens when oil spreads on water and then sits in the light?
Oh, it looks like a rainbow in the light.
It looks like a rainbow in the light. Anyone who has ever walked through a parking lot after the rain and seen a rainbow in a puddle has seen the kind of rainbow she's describing. Have y'all seen those puddle rainbows? Yeah, I stepped in one in bare feet when I was a kid because who wouldn't want to walk in a rainbow in your bare feet? And my mom was like, stop it, that's oil, that's gross. But I was like, but it's so pretty. So it's something dirty and gross that's also beautiful, kind of like the fish. So we have over and over these images of something that's dirty and gross and also beautiful, kind of back and forth. The dirty, grubby fish with lice that would be so beautiful if you cleaned it and ate it and cooked it and ate it. This kind of ugly old fish with this beard of wires who's kind of beautiful for his courage and having gotten away over and over again. The oil on the water, which is grubby and dirty, but also really beautiful. And she let the fish go. And it's an interesting decision to let the fish go. Why would you let that fish go if it were you? Or would you? Would you have kept it and eaten it?
I don't know. He's been through a lot.
Yeah. Let him go one more time.
Yeah.
He kind of deserves it. Yeah, maybe deserves a break. So this poem is one of our imagist poems, where what's important in the poem is really very much stuck in the images she gives you. The images where something can be both beautiful and ugly at the same time. Where something can be both a victory and a little guilty and shameful at the same time. I won, I caught the fish. I don't want to have caught this fish, right? And if you fished after, has anybody here ever caught the legendary fish and decided to let it go? Has anybody caught the legendary fish and decided to keep it as a trophy? All right, well, maybe we don't have the fishermen in the world, but this is a pretty common trope. This comes up in movies sometimes. So like on Golden Pond, there's an old movie there for you, kind of a classic old movie at this point, where they catch the big fish on the lake that everybody's been trying to catch, and they let it go. Out of respect for the elderly, I guess. But that's what this poem is about. It's about those different feelings that can exist together, of admiring something and being grossed out at it at the same time, of loving something and wanting to be generous to it, but also wanting to win at the same time. If you've ever played a game with your kid and decided to win and go ahead and make them cry, you know that feeling. You feel bad about it, but they need to learn to lose. And then every once in a while you let them win, right? So that they're not totally demoralized, right? Don't always let your kids win. That's not good. So do we have a better grasp on this poem? Does anybody still have questions about this poem? Okay, there's not a ton of extra meaning. The meaning's right in here. It's right in there, which is why I ask you to start with the literal meaning, because sometimes that's most of it, right? All right, let's talk. What are we going to talk about next? Brown Girl Dead or the Bean Eaters?
Brown Girl.
Brown Girl. All right, where's that one? Brown Girl Dead. All right, so this is by County Cullen. County Cullen was an African-American male poet who was writing in the 1920s and 30s. So we've got to center this in that moment. I'm going to skip that ad. Okay. We've got to center it in that moment so that we understand the historical context that we're reading in. So it said, somebody read me the first stanza, and then I'll have someone else read the second stanza. I'll make it a little bigger for you.
With 2 white roses on her breasts, white candles at head and feet.
Hold on. That's annoying as all get out. Hold on. We've even switched poems. Give me a second with the computer. I'm appalled it's not being interrupted by ads. Well, that's an improvement. I'll change the link in Blackboard to this one. It's a little more stable. You were reading. Can you continue reading, please? You were doing a beautiful job.
With 2 white roses on her breasts, white candles at head and feet, dark Madonna of the grave she rests, Lord Death has found her sleep.
Great. And who wants to read the second stanza?
Mother pawned her wedding ring to lay her out in white. She'd be so proud she'd dance and sing to see herself tonight.
Beautiful. Okay. So let's start with the literal meaning. What's happening here? Yes, a girl is dead. So we've automatically got a sad and unhappy poem here, right? This is a young person. We don't know exactly how old, but she's a young person. Let's take a look at the line, her mother pawned her wedding ring to lay her out in white. There are a lot of pronouns here, and it can be a little slippery because of the pronouns. Please let this be a lesson to you as writers not to overuse your pronouns. Whose wedding ring was pawned, the mother or the girl's?
The girl? No.
The mother's. Okay. The mother pawned her wedding ring. Okay. To lay her, so because this is a young girl, laid out in white indicates what? Does anybody know? White usually signifies innocence, and in the case of a young girl, this is the innocence of someone who's not old enough to have been married yet, right? So this is a very young girl. We don't know how old, but someone who would be proud to dance and sing to see herself in a beautiful white dress and never really got the chance in life to be in a beautiful white dress and dance and sing. Too young to have had that chance. This was a painful poem. It's about a mother mourning her daughter, right? Why call it A Brown Girl Dead? And I'm going to stop the share so we can look at each other. It seems like kind of an offensive title. That's on purpose. Why is the author calling it such a cold and unfeeling title?
Because it's a sad poem.
It is. There's more to it than that.
It carries a message too.
It does talk about the juxtaposition between the deep mourning and the dedication to this girl that we see from her family in the poem, the honor of this young girl. Okay, so we're in the poem, we're seeing people honor her, we're seeing people give away their last thing of value to make sure she has a good funeral. But the title is offensively cold. Why?
I guess they're trying to put emphasis on like the fact that the girl has a family. Because I guess something like that.
Think about this is the thing that's kind of hard to even talk about for me, because we still have these situations where a young person has died, and the response from the wider public, not from that young person's family, but from the wider public is, oh, another one of those. Right? And the author here is saying, in the title, he's taking on that coldness. That's just a brown girl dead. And that is a societal coldness, right? That doesn't care about this girl. She doesn't have a name to them. There is no mourning. There is no sense of grief in that title. It's a headline. It's like a newspaper headline, isn't it? And it's cold and brutal. And it's then we get into the poem, and there's this contrast with how deeply her family cares and is broken and is mourning. And the author really wants us to feel that disconnect between the title's coldness and the poem's grief. Does that make sense to y'all? He's trying to make us feel how the family would feel reading a headline like that. Did anybody dislike this poem because it made them feel that? Because if that's what made you hate this poem, the author did an amazing job. Because he was trying to make us uncomfortable with that callousness of the world, not agreeing to feel the grief or the humanity here of this poor girl who ought to have a name and doesn't. Right? Right? Her mother pawned her wedding ring. That's like the only thing she owns of value to pay for her daughter's funeral. And in terms of the public and the headline, doesn't even get a name. And the author's trying to give us that discomfort. Does that make sense? All right. Are we still confused about this poem, or do we have it in our pockets now? Do we like it or not like it? Napoleon, talk to me about why you don't like it.
I don't know why. I just gotta put it. I just don't like. I don't know. I can't explain why I don't like it. I got a feeling I just don't like it.
You don't have to like it. Anybody else dislike it?
I like. It's not that I don't like it, because I appreciate like the creativity that he put into the poem, but it's just dark, you know.
It is dark.
It's just heavy.
It is. It's very heavy. Wait till we get into some of the ones for next time. What's the value in a dark poem or a piece of literature that's dark? What's the value there? Why talk about something painful? Why memorialize it?
To understand it, to feel it.
Yep. To understand it, it builds empathy. It builds empathy in people maybe who couldn't understand the situation because they haven't been in it themselves. For those people maybe who have experienced it, it lets them know they're not alone, right? In having had those feelings. And that can be valuable as well, to see your own experience maybe with trauma or unhappiness reflected in someone else's writing can make, they say misery loves company, but the idea here is that maybe you feel seen for the first time. Maybe you see somebody feeling what you have felt for the first time. And that's really valuable to somebody who has experienced a trauma or a loss, right? So there's value in dealing with these difficult topics, and poetry very often does. Alice Walker has a poem where she says, poetry is what happens to the leftover love, where there's no place to put it. The extra grief that's too big to keep inside, we put it in a poem. And that's kind of an interesting definition of poetry. I think County Cullen might be interested in that. County Cullen is going to be dealing with racist topics in this set of poems and the next set of poems. He tries to get us to see how bad things are in his time. So that can be uncomfortable, but also well worth it. I don't think it's fair of us to pretend that things weren't difficult or bad. When we kind of think about the good old days, we kind of maybe need to remember they weren't that good for everybody. Yes, okay. Let's check in on the time. I am going to talk about the bean eaters real quick. Let me share my screen with you and get to the bean eaters. I can hear somebody talking, but I can't hear what you're saying. Can you say it louder?
I have my hand up. I think I wanted to say something.
Yes, ma'am. What were you going to say?
So, about that poem. Okay, I wrote that I like it. I didn't look at the dark side or the way the writer painted it. I look at the side, what the condition it placed, that the way it affected the girl and her parents. That's why I looked at it.
And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. The honor with which the family is treating that young girl is really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. But it's also tragic that that girl died. It's tragic that, it's a beautiful poem, but it's dark and it's painful. All right, The Bean Eaters. This is by Gwendolyn Brooks, also an African-American poet. She was writing a little bit later than County Cullen. She wrote in the 40s and into the 60s and early 70s. Let's see, who would like to read the first stanza here? Someone who has not read yet.
I'll go.
Go for it.
They eat beans. Mostly this old yellow pair. Dinner is a casual affair. Plain chipware on a plain and creaking wood. Tin flatware.
Great. And somebody wants to read the second stanza?
Two who are mostly good, two who have lived their day, but keep on putting on their clothes and putting them away.
Great. And the last stanza?
And remembering with twinkling and twinges, as they lean over the beans and their rented back room that is full of beads and receipts and dolls, cloths, tobacco crumbs, bosses, and fringes.
Great. So we have an old couple, and they're eating. What is plain chipware on a plain and creaking wood? What is that? What's plain chipware?
Is it like the table they eat on?
The creaking wood is the table they're eating on. What's the plain chipware?
Is it the utensils they use?
That's the tin flatware. So their forks and knives are made out of tin, so not super sturdy or fancy. What is the plain chipware?
Their plates.
Yes. What is chipware? Okay. In case you were wondering, it isn't a fancy brand of dinner plates. They're just plates that are, you guessed it, chipped. They're old and broken. What did I do there that was so magical to help me understand the poem?
Google.
I Googled a phrase in it and said, what is it? Right? So when you have a question, it's okay to take that specific question. I wouldn't type in what does the bean eaters mean, because then it's going to be doing all the work for you. But if you have a particular question about what's chipware, You can ask that. These are just old chipped dishes, right? All right, so they're not fancy. They're eating mostly beans. Dinner is casual. This is setting up an opposition to people who had china versus everyday dinnerware, who had silverware, who had fancy tables, and who would dress for dinner. It was a tradition amongst the rich to get all dressed up for dinner. And that's not these folks. These are folks, right? In the real sense of the word, which is just that they are regular, ordinary people like you and me who don't get dressed up for dinner and don't get out fancy china and actual silverware for dinner, right? They're people like you and I, right? Maybe even struggling a little bit more than some of us. Two who are mostly good. I love that those are capitalized, making it like a name or a title. Who have lived their day. They're old, but they keep on putting on their clothes and putting things away. What does that mean? I love that phrase. I hope when I'm old, I keep on putting on my clothes and putting things away. What does that mean? I need you to think about your oldest grandparents right now. What does that mean? I'm going to stop the share so we're not staring at it for a minute. What does that mean? They keep going, right. Does anybody here have a grandparent who's seriously old? Do they get up and get dressed every day? Awesome. Do they tidy up their house? They do. When they stop doing that, it's not good. It's not a good sign when that happens, right? Does anybody have a grandparent who needs to have someone else come and get them dressed and tidy up after them? You will at some point, right? They will get to that point. I know, that's depressing to think about, but they're not there yet. They're still putting on their clothes and putting things away, right? And then it says, and I love this line, I'm going to go ahead and share again. And so they're eating and remembering with twinklings and twinges. What is it to remember with twinklings and twinges? What does that mean?
That's the part I was confused about. I don't know what a twinge is.
Oh, a twinge is like, ooh, that's a painful memory. And a twinkling is a happy memory, right? So don't make it too hard. When you remember, sometimes it's a twinkling memory and you go, oh, that was lovely, remember that, and you have a laugh at that memory and it's a wonderful, happy, twinkly memory. Sometimes the memory is a twinge of, oh, that was painful, that hurt, I remember that too, that was a hard time, right? Facebook memories can give us twinkles and twinges, right? So when you're thinking about those twinkles and twinges, think about those Facebook memories that pop up, and some of them are happy, funny memories, and some of them are kind of hard to look at, right? And those are twinges. And everybody's going to, you're going to look back at your life from old age someday with some twinkles and some twinges, right? It's not all good. It's not all bad, right? And that's a good life to have lived. And they lean over their beans in their rented room that is full of beads and receipts and dolls and cloths, tobacco crumbs, vases, and fringes. So it's funny because, again, we have a juxtaposition between the good and the bad. Some people read it and they think they're hoarders. They're not hoarders. They're people who have saved some things over the years. They don't have much, but they have some things. Why does an old couple have a doll?
You said a dog?
A doll. A doll. They have a doll. Why?
Grandchildren or something?
Grandchildren, or from their children that they saved because it was special to their child when they were little, right? My daughter has a little bear. She carried, still at 9 years old, she's going to have it at bedtime, right? And when she grows out of it, I'm going to keep that, right? There are things that you keep, little treasures that you keep from your kids, and maybe you keep it to hand it down. My parents kept some of the things from my childhood, and my daughter now has them, things that I played with that she can now play with. So sometimes you keep those things, and sometimes they stay. Sometimes my grandmother has things at her house that my granddaughter plays with that I played with when I was a little girl, right? And she just keeps them for when the grandchildren come over, right? So they've had this full life, and it makes them seem kind of sad and pitiful that they eat mostly beans, but they've had this good life. And that's why I love that it refers to them as mostly good, right? Don't we kind of all wish for that in our old age? The mostly good, right? So again, we see just kind of like in the fish, we see some negatives and positives, but we've put them together, and there's so much love for this ordinary poor couple. And I feel like a lot of us are really quick to judge somebody who's poor and just make it all negative. These people aren't unhappy. They're eating their beans, they're talking, they're remembering. Their house is full. And there's so much love in this poem for these bean eaters, right? And I think that the other images there of the poverty and their hard times are there to remind us that not everything has to be fine and beautiful and fancy and rich to be mostly good, right? I love the love with which Gwendolyn Brooks writes about this older couple. I love it. It's there's so much love here for just this, poor, mostly good older couple. She likes them. And you can kind of tell that she likes them, right? Do you have this poem in your pocket? Do you like it better now that you understand it? Hot dog. All right. It's important to see the love when there's love in a poem. And I think that's my challenge for you in the next set of poems that we're going to start reading next week. And I want to talk to you about those for a minute before I let you go. The poems in the next set get kind of political. And it's old politics, y'all. It's politics from the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, sometimes reaching into the 60s. Some of it is dark, and some of it is filled with love, but all of the poems are written with love. Sometimes it's love that has produced anger because people they love are being mistreated. Sometimes it's love of self and self-respect that they're talking about. How do I hang on to my self-respect when I'm not getting any respect from anyone else, right? Sometimes it's trying to hang on to love even through despair, right? So I want you to look at the poems. I want you to ask yourself some questions, especially with the poems that make you uncomfortable. Why does this make me uncomfortable? Why did the poet want me to be uncomfortable? And in what ways did the poet want me to be uncomfortable? Right? Because the poet's doing this to you on purpose for a reason, right? Do they want you to get angry with them? Do they want you to understand something you're ignorant about? What is it that they want from you when you read these poems, right? And sometimes they want something big, like an action from you. And sometimes they want you to just understand your world a little differently, right? Now, if there are poems that you don't like or that make you genuinely angry, keep your finger on those. I'd like you to have the chance to voice your anger and frustration or dislike, as well as your liking of something, right? Because those visceral responses to poetry are important. You don't have to like everything you read, right? And some things make us angry for a good reason, and we should discuss those reasons if you want to. Or we don't have to. If it makes you too angry and you don't want to deal with it, I respect that as well. But yes, are we ready for next week's readings? Just because we didn't talk about it doesn't mean we didn't talk about it last time in the video talking about the poems from Unit 1. There are some, we do discuss some other poems other than the ones that we talked about today. So I'm going to stop the recording, otherwise it's way too long.